The protest rally in Noumea, the capital of New Caledonia, was memorable not only for the raising of the Azerbaijani flag among others, but also for the deportation of Azerbaijani journalist Aygun Hasanova. The reason for such an uncharacteristic response to a media representative in a country that positions itself as democratic is simple. The journalist came from Azerbaijan, a country to which France's discontent is evident by its sisterly feelings towards Armenia. It was during Azerbaijan's presidency that the non-aligned movement became one of the world's most prominent platforms against neo-colonialism. It was the representatives of this movement who created the Baku Initiative group against French colonialism, and in late October held a conference on neo-colonialism, human rights violations and injustice. The conference was attended by representatives of New Caledonia and many former and current French colonies: Algeria, Mali, Morocco, Guadeloupe, Martinique, French Guiana, and French Polynesia. Moreover, in his address to the participants of the conference, President Ilham Aliyev supported the calls of international organizations to assess the damage caused to the colonies where the Fifth Republic conducted nuclear tests. The Baku Forum was also attended by David Van Abo, Deputy Secretary General of the Caledonian Union, who said that New Caledonia wants to choose its own political course rather than remain in shackles. On the 21st November, another conference was held in Baku: Decolonization, Women's Empowerment. The representatives of New Caledonia have repeatedly pointed out that France is trying to avoid including it in the list of countries that were colonized, and it is only thanks to Azerbaijan that they were able to make their voice heard through such an influential platform as the non-aligned movement. It was here that they were able to gain the support of the international community to hold a second referendum on independence. It should be recalled that in 1958, after the establishment of the Fifth Republic, Paris founded the so-called French Community, which include overseas departments, overseas territories, and colonies in Africa. These territories held various degrees of autonomy. The first were formed in Algeria, French Guiana, Guadeloupe, Martinique, Mayotte, and Réunion. Today, they are everywhere except Algeria. Overseas territories also exist in New Caledonia, Comoros, French Polynesia, and others. Paris was worse off with its colonies. Until 1960, there were 12 of them: Mauritania, Senegal, Ivory Coast, Benin, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Gabon, Chad, Central African Republic, Congo, and the Malagasy Republic. In 1960, all the colonies gained independence, but Paris kept them within its zone of influence. The point is that the former colonies still have to repay the colonial debt to pay for the infrastructure created during the colonial period. More than 80% of the currency reserves of these countries are placed in operational accounts controlled by the French treasury. According to experts, Paris now holds about $500 billion money stolen from African countries. The authorities of the countries themselves can spend only 15% of their money per year, but the number of countries that are still under French influence is rapidly decreasing. In recent years, several other former French colonies have declared their desire to get rid of Paris influence. Similar calls were made during protests in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. At the request of local authorities, French troops withdrew from two African countries, Burkina Faso and Mali. They've also begun to withdraw from Niger. As a result, Chad is the last country where the Fifth Republic retains a contingent. When the topic of neo-colonialism was raised back in the Soviet era, when the issue of assistance to countries that had survived colonialism was on the agenda, even then, it was said that as a result of the policy of colonialism that the world was split into Western states and the Third World. Algeria in 1930 and South Africa in 1950, for example, were characterized by one of the highest levels of inequality in human history. The share of the top 10% of income belonging to Europeans there was about 70% of the total. So why did France and other Western countries continue to keep former colonies under their sway? For the answer, just look at a map of natural resources. They were rich in minerals, and yet they were not characterized by positive economic indicators. In the 20th century, due to pressure from the USSR, the unequal distribution of resources in the Western countries changed significantly. However, as the confrontation with the countries of the socialist bloc came to an end, the foundations of the Western social state began to be revised. Economic and financial regulation was weakened. This, since the early 80s, has led to growing income inequality and hyper-concentration of wealth. This, in turn, gave rise to a new round of colonialism, neo-colonialism. Once again, a scheme of social and financial inequality was formed. Consumer countries sucked on the natural resources of states that continued to be financially enslaved. Even in the 21st century, global inequality remains very high, bearing the wounds of the colonial legacy and divergent development trajectories of the West. Both old and new centers of influence seek to permanently subjugate the weaker ones, preventing them from developing independently. For most countries in Africa, South Asia, and a number of other countries that supposedly receive international aid, the outward financial flows consisting of the profits of transnational corporations are in fact many times greater than the inward financial flows of international aid. It turns out that rich countries are ostensibly helping poor countries. In reality, the latter that continues to exploit them. In other words, the West continues to consider itself exceptional, following Borrell's statement that Europe is the Garden of Eden and the rest of the world is a jungle that is very resistant to change.